What's the customer experience you're trying to create? And what's the vehicle that will create that experience sort of to start with and then sustainably?
Okay, Colart, thanks for being here.
Sure.
So we're at Sunday, and it's
Yeah.
about 12:26 p.m.
I
What's
know.
been happening?
Oh gosh, what hasn't been happening? There's 10 teams in the mix, and they have just received their second round of feedback. So as the process goes, we invite the teams into a mock judging panel to give them some early feedback on how their proposition is shaping up. And this morning they received their second round of feedback. So a lot of the teams are absorbing that feedback, reflecting on it, changing and shifting their pitches. That some of the feedback can be quite confronting if you're not used to it. So I'd say a lot of them are doubling down on the home stretch. We're running pretty close to the wire. There's only 4.5 hours left before we down tools, and it's all over.
Wow. So it must be pretty intense at the moment.
Yeah.
Go for it. Yeah.
Hello, everyone! Hello! I don't need a microphone. I'm really proud of mine. So, food is ready, so grab a quick bite because in 3 minutes we have pitch practice again. We're going to do the same order as we did last night and this morning. Same space, so be ready for the next pitch practice. And grab food!
Are you good to...
Yeah, I'm good because they'll be pitch practicing.
Okay.
Also, they'll lunch and then pitch practice will go through that. So
Cool.
That's awesome.
Awesome. So, Colart, tell us
Yeah.
about yourself. Give us a bit of an idea of your background.
Oh gosh, yeah. It's I think the first thing is that my background is super diverse.
Yeah.
I was born in sub-Saharan Africa. Moved around. I lived in about 5 different countries and attended 26 different schools by the time I was 18. I served in the South African Defence Force as a submariner, and shortly after that met my wonderful partner and moved to the UK, to England. Studied computer science, got involved with corporates in the UK around business design and business architecture, and spent 10 years in the UK before deciding to move to New Zealand. I have family here, and we wanted to kind of open a different kind of chapter for our lives. Moved to New Zealand 11 years ago, so I'm kind of a new Kiwi in a way. And yeah, we've got a wonderful little family, young family, and at the moment my focus is a bit of a mission, which I can talk to, but right now I'm a business owner and a freelance agile coach.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay. And tell us what you're doing this weekend at Startup Weekend.
Yeah, so I've been involved in quite a few startup weekends in New Zealand, and I'm very privileged to be one of the community leaders in New Zealand. And for this startup weekend, I've joined with Pauli, who's the lead organizer, just to support her founding a new organizing team and getting a new group of mentors together and building our event back up again in Auckland. So I'm wearing a few hats. I'm currently mostly a mentor for our teams.
Cool. So are you mentoring a bunch of different teams, or is it one specific
Yeah,
team?
you tend to move around in the first half of the weekend. Mm-hmm. Towards the second half of the weekend, we hone in on one and support them through the rest of their journey. So our role changes as the process kind of gets through the weekend.
Gotcha. And if there's like an area that you tend to kind of focus on that you kind of feel passionate about in terms of helping teams, what would that area be?
Yeah, so I mean, my personal focus, I'm a business designer by trade. So I kind of studied and practiced the art of engineering a business to serve a purpose. So that's one of the ways I feel I can help the most on the floor. I also understand the startup weekend process very well, so I can often guide teams through the challenges that you face. There's a lot of things that are quite peculiar to startup weekend as an experience, and sometimes you need a bit of help navigating it. So how to take constructive feedback and that sort of thing. But yeah, so business model would probably be my sweet spot, and that's the type of thing I like to help with.
Gotcha. And when you say business model, what does that mean? Like, assume I'm just coming into this for the first time.
Sure.
What does that mean, a business model? Is that the business model that's going to help me run throughout the whole time I'm a business, or just at the start? Like,
yeah. I mean, there are many different definitions. The one that works best for me is what's the customer experience you're trying to create, and what's the vehicle that will create that experience sort of to start with, and then sustainably. So there's a kind of a customer in that story, there's a need or a problem, and then meeting that need, how valuable is that to a customer? That's usually where a business model starts to kick in. What's the model for providing a solution to that? Does it actually solve the problem for a real customer? And if it does it for a real customer, how many customers are there? What is there a market there? So business model, you'd be very concerned with what's the purpose that you're engineering for, that you're designing for, and what's the experience that you're designing for? And then building out a sustainable model means that, yes, I can solve that problem for that customer. Can I scale that in a way that remains somewhat profitable and impactful?
Right, okay. So you talked about customer experience and business model, and how a customer experience can help you figure out a business model. Is that kind of where you're going?
I think there's a very strong relationship between those two. I'd say most businesses, I'd struggle to find a business that doesn't care about the experience that it creates for its customers.
Yeah.
So I think the way I'd link those two is, I'd say, in a customer's world, and a customer is somebody that finds something valuable in a proposition, and so they're willing to pay money for having something solved for them. I love Clayton Christensen's definitions around customer jobs to be done. So most people, like you're a customer, I'm a customer, in different capacities, we will have certain things that we just kind of want to do and have in our lives and that sort of thing. And that's the role that business plays, is to kind of meet some of those needs. So that's that experience getting a bit more empathetic and outside of your business model is helpful to really empathize with the kind of experience that you're trying to create, that you're solving for in a customer's world, and then building that back to, okay, how might I solve that in a way that is impactful, that it genuinely solves the problem, it doesn't create too much collateral damage, and it's something that I can do affordably, within the model, that the model can sustain itself.
Right, gotcha. Yeah, because I guess when most people think business model, they think immediately money. How is this making money?
Yeah.
But you're also speaking about how is it going to continue, and how's it going to, what's the life cycle of the product?
I think one of the tools that we use in a startup weekend tries to help teams unpack what we mean by a business model. And it's called the Lean Canvas. It's derived from the business model canvas originally, Alexander Osterwalder business model canvas. And basically there's 9 parts to the story of what a business model is. And we try to get our teams to articulate who the customer is, what's the problem they're trying to solve, what their version of the solution is, what's the value proposition, which means what is the benefit that the customer is actually buying. And this is, we haven't mentioned revenues and costs just yet, so the financial part of the story is often almost the last dimension that we talk about, because so much of what builds up to the financials is based on the assumptions around the model that you've created, like how are you actually going to do this, and then there's sort of key metrics and channels to consider. There's a whole bunch of things in a good lean canvas that will give you a starting point for the component parts of a business model. There's actually quite a bit more to that, but that's often a really good starting point for teams and business owners for understanding the anatomy of their business. And then, of course, that gives rise to the effects that we want. We want to stimulate profit. We want to create yield. And we also want to be very conscious about how much it costs to create that yield. So that's where that sort of last two sort of criteria link together then. It's like, how much is it going to cost? What's it going to make me?
Gotcha. Cool. Okay. So earlier you mentioned something before we started talking. You mentioned what you connect with is about building a beautiful business.
Yes.
And
yes.
that's
Thank
something
you.
that you really kind of want to emphasize for the teams here. Tell us what does that mean? What is a beautiful business?
Yeah. Well, thank you. So it's kind of a mission that I've given myself relatively early in my career. I became quite, I guess, concerned about how pure profit-driven business models can generate a lot of negative impact in the world, collateral damage, and almost kind of unthinkingly and unconsciously. And in some cases, some businesses will have a conscious, acceptance of the pollution that they've caused. So there's this sort of callousness, I think, that's inherent in traditional business views that say we're all about profit and generating value for shareholders. And I'm very pleased to count myself amongst a growing movement that's trying to change the narrative around what businesses can be used for. I think would it be too dramatic to say that humanity is facing some grand challenges? Most prominently recently we've got climate change, but I think there are quite a few groups that are really well researched that are calling out concern and warnings for a whole bunch of areas, threats that are actually that we're facing as a species on our planet. With the mounting challenges, they're rising up ahead of us, really big challenges. I passionately believe that businesses have a part to play in what happens next and shaping what happens next. So that's a place that I feel I can contribute. So that's my main motivation for being involved with Startup Weekend. Is really I would love to see more beautiful businesses in the world. And to me, if I define it for you, it's got 4 elements to it. The 4 Ps is the most convenient way I think of it.
Nice.
They're purposeful, so they've got an impact story to them. There's a conscious, deliberate design for a purpose, for an impact. So purposeful. They are kind to people and planet. So beautiful businesses are kind to the people inside their business as well as the people around their business. So human-centered, that sort of thing. And planet, of course, right? It's a no-brainer. I think it should be just a hygiene factor and really accepted as a norm for all business types. So people and planet. And then, of course, the fourth one, prosperity. And I think we need to broaden our definition of what prosperity means. So that could have a profit dimension to it. But I would love for us to encourage a broader narrative around what prosperity means. Names just escaped me. Bhutan. In Bhutan, they have the National Happiness Index.
Right.
And New Zealand is prototyping a National Wellness Index. So I think there are ways for us to explore better measures that help us create more balance in our society. And so beautiful businesses to me are businesses that are purposeful, kind to people and planet, and are profitable or prosperous.
Okay, so if I was a startup and I've got an idea, I'm really excited by it, what's the easiest entry point for me to start thinking about how to design a beautiful business? Like, what are the first kind of actionable steps that I can take to do this?
Wow.
Or tools that are available for me to start thinking about this?
Easy. Yeah. Okay. Gosh. I think there are many different starting points, and depending, I'm assuming our audience is a little bit fresh to the space. So if you have been playing in the space for a while, these will sound familiar.
Yeah.
One of them would be, I'd invite you to take a look at something called the social lean canvas.
Yeah.
All right, and a little bit of the writing around that. Mm-hmm. So this was brought in as a bit of a response or an extension to the normal lean canvas, which was quite product development focused. And what it adds to the social lean canvas is a story about the impact and the purpose you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
And just how you're going to do that. What's your theory of change as a way of doing that? So, but it bolts that onto the normal business model story, which I actually think is an implied part of any business. Is what's the impact you're trying to create in the world? Yeah. But I think if you're starting and you've got an idea and you want to just have a play with what possible effect it could have, I would invite you to just really think about the kind of world that you want to live in, and that you want your children and grandchildren, the next generations, to live in a couple of decades' time, a couple of generations' time. And I think playing to that horizon is a really great place to start thinking about the impact you want to create, what's the world we want to create, develop that vision, add to others' versions of what that looks like, the ones that appeal to you most, and then take that as an influence in shaping your starting point. You go, I want to orientate my startup that way, create that change in the world.
Gotcha. And I'm guessing this is not just about thinking about a purpose. It's also about, well, how am I going to conduct the business?
Yes.
It's not just about the goal, but it's how I get there as well.
Yes.
And I'm guessing that has something to do with sustainability and my practices, whether it be manufacturing or whether it be how I treat my, employees.
Yeah.
Is that something that startups now should be thinking about, or is that something that's a little bit further down the line?
It's a great leading question, and I would wholeheartedly say yes. At every stage, if you can, pay some consideration. I think it really is worth considering your value system and making sure that any venture that you're pursuing, because it's kind of hard. It's not an easy path, the entrepreneur's path, and you are seduced by opportunities, and it's good to kind of bring a conscience into that. And I think that's the thing that kind of pays off in the long run.
Yeah.
I have yet to meet an entrepreneur that isn't affected by the choices that they've made on the fly. And even those opportunities that you've taken, the ones that kind of throw you out of balance in yourself, can sometimes come back to haunt you.
And I guess the reason I asked that is because at an early stage like this, you've got a lot of things to think about and limited resources.
True.
Right?
Yeah.
Limited time, limited mental capacity maybe.
Yeah.
So, how do you kind of step into this? What is the palatable way of thinking about?
I don't think there's an easy answer to that. I think it really depends on the entrepreneur, the startup idea, the context that they're operating in. Myself and a huge growing group of collaborators are passionate about creating the environmental conditions for better businesses to show up. So hopefully, by the time you, the listener of this podcast, takes your idea and starts to move on it, there are going to be more people around you, and society will be more conducive, I guess, to more ethical business propositions that are kind of making their way out there.
Right. Tell me about what environmental conditions need to be there. How would we facilitate that?
Yeah. I think there's something in the language that we use and the stories and the narratives that we have around the startup or the entrepreneur's journey. I think up until now, the world has become quite enamored with the Silicon Valley version of what it means to be a startup and that sort of entrepreneur's journey. And I'm very pleased to see growing cynicism, I would say is probably a strong word, but there is a growing healthy cynicism around that that makes our communities, our entrepreneurial communities, think a little bit more deeply about how we actually want to be as a startup and what that journey really, really means. You're not just gunning for an exit. I was at a summit a couple of years ago, and we heard from a speaker that put up a little video clip or a little picture of a casino, and with lots of sort of classic Las Vegas sort of casino scene, and he said, invited the audience to imagine what it sounded like being in that room. He says, "What do you hear?" And we're all sitting there, mumbling in the audience, and of course the first thought to us was, well, the sound of people winning. It's just the bells and the whistles and the music and the lights and everything else. It's all like, and he said, what don't you hear? And that was the more telling part. It's like, wow, you don't hear the failures, the amount of money that's going in that's not coming out. And do you know what I mean? And that's a proxy for energy. And he invited us to draw a parallel between that and Silicon Valley. And he said, this is what Silicon Valley's like. It's a gambling den. And you're only hearing about the winners, and you're not hearing about the losers. So I think one of the things in our communities around startups, the narrative, the story around startups that I think we need to balance is survivor bias. It's this idea of, if you're only hearing from the survivors are shaping the narrative. That's not necessarily the only data point. So we do need to create a more balanced conversation around what it means to be a startup. And I think from that things will flow through. We're already gaining more momentum with our big institutions. So Callaghan Innovation in New Zealand is making strong steps to supporting the ecosystem better. They launched a site called Scale Up .co.nz, I think it is. And gosh, I encourage you to have a look at that if you get a chance. They've put a lot of resources on there for the startup of today, which is very different to the landscape that it was even 3 or 5 years ago.
Oh, very cool. Scaleup.org.
Scaleup. Yeah, I think it's scaleup.org, yes.
Okay, cool. Definitely check that out.
Thank you.
Now, you mentioned that you're working on something very cool. Tell me about NetworkNZ.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Yes, gosh. So I'm very excited. I've become a new shareholder in a networking platform called NetworkNZ.
Yeah.
NetworkNZ is a community of around 12,000 small to medium-sized businesses across New Zealand. And it started out as a support group around sometimes isolated remote business owners, and it just gathered momentum, and it's just grown into this amazing community. I think they play a strong role in shaping our economy, and I'm incredibly privileged to be stepping in as a co-owner alongside a lady named Candice Baker, who's one of the mentors at Startup Weekend.
Oh, cool.
So our attention is fully focused on that network, on that community, and just helping them get to the next stage. It's all about growth of the individual, growth of their business, and there's a whole bunch of things happening in that space. So thanks for the mention. Yeah,
cool.
that's awesome.
No worries. So I, as a startup founder, how do I access NetworkNZ, and what would be a typical journey for a user through NetworkNZ?
Oh, mate, fantastic. Thanks for the question, giving me a chance to plug. I think the first thing I would do is just join the Facebook group. We've got a huge, vibrant, free Facebook group, and then there are 2 tiers of membership. So there's a paid membership that goes with that. And a lot of the feedback that we get from our members is like, we can't believe it's so cheap, and so there's a really great growth potential in that. So if you did feel like that was an option for you, then that could be something down the line. But as a starting point, just join the free group and get amongst it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. And through the paid membership, what would be a typical user journey? Asking it in the terms of, I guess, Startup Weekend, right? Like, what's the user journey of
that?
Yeah.
So I think the value proposition is typically the members have going concerns themselves.
Yeah.
So we bring to bear the force of that whole community on your business.
Right.
So there's a ready-made audience of 12,000 businesses that are quite active and engaged. There's a lot of goodwill and passion and community values and I mean, like strong collective type patterns, I'd say. And so for a business that gets amongst that, we've got a number of ways that we can help you leverage that, and we curate it very carefully, so we're making sure that you're contributing as much as you're getting out.
Cool.
So it's a really nice, fun pool to play in, So things like directory listings, our website is incredibly well ranked. There's a bunch of services that will go with that.
Very cool. Cool. And how do people find out about this again?
Facebook, NetworkNZ.
NetworkNZ. And is there a website?
There is networknz.nz.
Nice.
Yes.
Yeah. I was hoping it was that. Yeah.
Yes.
Very cool.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you for that.
And finally, how many of these have you done?
Gosh, probably in the mid-20s.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
7 years now, I think. Yeah, I was just counting.
So, of those, have you mostly been participating or mentoring? Or
done just about every
everything?
role in the mix.
Yeah.
So the roles are organizer, lead organizer. There's mentoring. There's a bunch of, in the organizing team themselves, there's portfolios that you'd own, things like communications and social media and those sort of things. Judging, I haven't been a judge, and facilitating. So the job that Pascal and Travis are doing so well this weekend, myself and Pauli are quite practiced facilitators. We're always happy to step up there. So so I've probably done just about all the jobs.
Right,
except for the judging just yet, yes.
Cool. So I guess, of the data you've collected, what are like maybe 3 things that you would want to tell startups going in, or individuals going into one of these weekends?
Awesome. Yeah, great. Yeah, so a bit of experience there has shown me there's a couple of traps to avoid and a couple of tips. So sort of three traps to avoid. One is there's a really strong tendency to solutionize, and that's mainly because when we're calling out a problem, when we're sharing an idea on the Friday night, it's you're already imagining a solution to it, so you're pitching the solution. And so one of the traps that we see teams fall into a lot is the kind of holding on to the solution side, and it obscures their sight or their ability to really see the problem domain that they're trying to operate in. So that's trap number one.
Yep.
Another trap is comfort zones. That it's just a little bit on that sort of play of, if I've pitched an idea and that's the solution, I've already dropped a bit of an anchor in that spot, and I'm reluctant to leave that spot because I'm invested in there, So I've got a team around me. They supported my idea. I won I've won the popularity vote. Voted on my idea, and now I'm kind of in this place where it's uncomfortable to leave that. And so that's another thing, is like a lot of ideas sort of stay close to their original mark at first, and then it's feedback and validation that starts to kick that loose and challenge that point. So I think comfort zone, be aware of where your comfort zone is, and Startup Weekend is all about getting out of your comfort zone and going where others haven't gone, and that's uncomfortable inherently. So just kind of come to terms with that. I think the third trap there is just failing to learn, like going in ahead, bumping the sides, getting something wrong, going back, find yourself in the same place again. There's a few patterns that show up at Startup Weekends that are like, cool, if you look out for them and you're in a learning mode, you're in good shape. But if it's just like they say, if you turn up for a meeting and you want to fight, you're going to get a fight. You turn up for a meeting and you want to learn, you're going to learn. So I think for a Startup Weekend, turn up so you want to learn. So that would be like a thing. I think 3 tips would be on those is a kind of like fast feedback. Get feedback as fast as you can. I heard a team yesterday, they had talked themselves into spending most of the Saturday doing validation, and they were going to move from one end of their list and work their way all the way to the other end of their list before they would stop and regroup. And I said, well, what if you chose 2 or 3 conversations, quickly regrouped, and use that to inform your decision of where you want to play next, get some fast feedback. And they were like, oh yeah, it does seem like a good idea. And so I think that's just one of those sort of strategies you can use, is just close the loop faster.
Gotcha.
And I think trust the process would be the final thing I'd say. It's just it's tried and tested, it's evolved over a long time, and people, you can't help but learn something. And I think there's a lot there to learn, but you have to be open to kind of capture those learnings as you go through. So those would be some pro tips to leave you with.
No, I can definitely echo that. I've seen teams in hackathons go in and literally stand up in front of people and say, we don't have an idea, but we're going to find one. And they ended up winning. Because they didn't come in with a solution.
More open-minded, right?
More open-minded.
Yeah.
No, definitely. All right, well, thank you, Walt. I think it's time to eat.
Thank you, my friend. Yeah, I really appreciated the conversation.
That was great.
Yeah, look forward to seeing you at the next Startup Weekend.
For sure.
Awesome.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.